Welcome attendees and our chairs, Doug and Andrew, who are joining by fellow workgroup members and contributing to the Blockchain for Hospitality white paper, which is also available on htng.org. Would Doug or Andrew please introduce today's presenter for a webinar on blockchain use cases for distribution?
Hi, I'd like to introduce our speaker for today, Alex Lamb from ARISE. Alex has been active in the work group and is working with a company that is doing blockchain and distribution. So Alex, please take it away.
All right, thanks a lot, Doug. So today we're going to be talking about how blockchain technology can apply to hospitality, particularly for use case in distribution. So I'll jump right into it here. So a little bit about myself. I'm the CTO and co-founder of ARISE. We're focusing on building technology to connect basically parties that interact in the hospitality industry in a way that's a bit different than what traditionally has been done. And I'll introduce some of those concepts as we go through this presentation. My background is originally in the property management system space. I was previously at a PMS system, cloud-based PMS system called Front Desk Anywhere, based out of San Francisco. And that's kind of how we were introduced to some of the challenges faced by the hospitality industry in the way of distribution. And how we realized that blockchain may be able to potentially solve some of the inefficiencies and lack of transparency that occurs today. So we'll go through that in a bit. So if you're joining these webinars, I guess, and if this is the first webinar, there's a few in this blockchain series that may be beneficial to take a look at before this one. We're not going to go into the technology of how blockchain works here, just the use case and distribution. So these two previous webinars could be beneficial if you need to be brought up to speed on some of the tech and some of the terms used. Blockchain 101. We'll actually go over, I believe, the technology terminology and a bit how it works. And then there's also a summary of the general use cases of blockchain in hospitality, including distribution. But this is purely focused on distribution for this webinar. So the agenda today, we're going to go over how travel distribution operates in the existing framework, what's currently in place. Then review what it could look like with blockchain involved in that kind of distribution space. The different types of architectures for blockchain and how it can impact distribution. We'll dive a bit into the potential use cases, more specific applications of blockchain in distribution. Then the end result of what could happen once this is in place and once blockchain is used in distribution. And then we'll review who currently is working in this space, and then follow up with questions if anyone has questions at the end. So to get started here, we'll take a look at kind of what things look like today in the hospitality distribution space. So over the last 20 years, we've seen kind of a number of intermediaries kind of connect together to move hotel information. So this is information from their PMS system, from their CRS, from their channel manager, out to points of distribution in the world. So these could be travel agents, this could be online travel agencies, maybe TMCs, basically anyone who needs access to hotel data. And what's formed are kind of these centralized, interconnected intermediaries. Oftentimes we see that they each have their own unique data schemas, their own APIs to communicate with each other, and their own unique business logic. We also see that most of the time they're building and maintaining their own caches of data, and they need to constantly sync these caches with each other through their message formats, through these APIs. So the result of this is that there are many inefficiencies between these systems and how these systems communicate, which has created opportunities for some arbitrage for when there are differences in rates between different sources of supply. There's also, we find intermediaries take fees or add markups pretty often to move this data from point to point, from the hotel out to where their rooms are ultimately sold. And we have a problem where there's no visibility into what each system is doing. So this means that as soon as the hotel passes their information on to that first intermediary, they kind of lose visibility into what happens with that information. It's an opaque system. So this often leads to the hotelier having no idea ultimately where their rates may end up, where they're being sold, no insight into maybe the rate that the guest is paying, just general lack of transparency all around. So this is what a kind of a very rough visual representation of what the space looks like today. We have a whole bunch of different parties passing information between each other. It can be, and it can get even messier than this. This is just an example, but we kind of have this group in the middle that we're labeling and calling intermediaries here that a big part of the value they add is connectivity between the two ends. So this is the hotel and passing the information on to some customer facing agent or website or outlet. But they also provide a kind of a caching layer in between. So some of the value these intermediaries provide is almost like a protection layer for the hotel CRS or for the hotel PMS, where live queries come in from the customer facing sites and hit the caches in the middle instead of having those queries passed all the way through, which can cause a lot of load on hotel systems. And sometimes, in the past, there have been problems when these systems can't keep up. And in certain cases, they do go down. So the value today for these intermediaries is some of what is like caching, connectivity, and also a lot of times they own the relationship with the hotel. So the customer facing sites don't need to go in and negotiate contracts, which each hotel, with each hotel, they ultimately sell their inventory for. So this is the landscape today. So let's say we started to bring blockchain into this. We can take a look at how that could impact this distribution landscape. So one of the biggest changes is that the blockchain and the blockchain network are ultimately it's kind of like a set of connected nodes that rely on a blockchain to communicate and pass information between each other. It becomes a shared distributed database that all these network participants are connecting to and interacting with at the same time. So to contrast that with the way these individual systems work today with their different message formats, different caches, this shared common database lets everyone look at the same view of the data at the same time and interact with it at the same time. What that means is if someone updates a piece of information on the blockchain, fairly quickly, everyone else will have that same piece of data, that same change in the node that they connect to locally. So this solves the inefficiencies of the way today these intermediaries connect with each other. Because there's almost real-time data flowing between every single connected party, there's less opportunity for arbitrage or for intermediaries to kind of benefit from the exclusive data they have access to. And it also makes it much clearer kind of who is responsible for making changes to this shared database, and better visibility for the owner of hopefully where their inventory is being sold. So because everyone has the same view at the same time, it's much easier for people to kind of view and troubleshoot problems when they arise. And we hope as a result, efficiency increases, support loads for hotels or intermediaries or OTAs are decreased because it's much quicker to debug a problem, especially around availability or rates being out of sync. It's much easier to find out where the source of that problem is and resolve it quickly without kind of calling up or down the chain, as we like to say. So the landscape with blockchain, contrasted to the previous example, looks a bit different, or this is the way we see it. So instead of having kind of this group of intermediaries, maybe that's wholesalers, possibly GDS, some switches in the middle, we see the supply side. So this would be the hotels, the CRS systems, their channel managers, connecting into this kind of shared blockchain data store in the middle. And then this is what's used to move that information out to the customer facing side. So Of course, this is just one example of how the connectivity could work. I'll go through some other examples in later slides, but from our point of view, we don't necessarily see the hotel kind of dropping the systems they use, meaning their CRS or their channel manager that they rely on today for connectivity, and necessarily changing the way they operate. We see the initial rollout as just as a blockchain network being just another distribution channel that they use to distribute their inventory. So let's take a look at how different architectures can actually impact who connects to a blockchain network. So in a public blockchain model, and I'll go through this super quick, it's generally the idea is that they're public and they're permissionless. So this means that anyone can view the information on the blockchain network. Anyone can connect to it, and depending on permission levels and stuff like that, anyone can manipulate the data. So this could mean that not only do traditional systems that interact with hotel data today connect, but there is a possibility for guests themselves to have visibility into what's happening on these networks. Maybe have some control over their own reservations independently of a third party, or independently of maybe the OTA they booked through. Or there could be an application that the guest uses to manage their bookings across multiple OTAs or multiple hotels. This public permissionless open network, there are many different possibilities for the type of applications that could be built that are considerably different than what we deal with today. So this is an example of how a network could be built and who connects with a public blockchain model. So a little bit more private version of that, of a public blockchain network, is kind of like a consortium model. So this means that instead of this being completely open, everyone having access, oftentimes consortium-based or consensus or blockchains that use a consortium consensus model have multiple parties connecting and controlling the network, but it's more of a private permissioned network. So this means instead of everyone being able to connect, it's a much smaller group. The parties connecting have known identities on the network, so it's very clear who may be writing to the network, who's making changes. There's a bit more control and permission in this example. So in this diagram here, this could be a consortium network where there's two hotel chains who've decided to create and share control of the blockchain network to use it for distribution to multiple OTAs. So in this case, chain 1 and chain 2 would have equal control over the network. They would decide who gets to join. They would decide what permissions everyone has, and they would kind of control the rollout and architecture of this network. So then we see the fully private network configuration, which what we're looking at today is a model. It's almost like it almost begins as like a peer-to-peer network, meaning there's a hotel group. Maybe they want to work with a single connected party. They want to increase the visibility and auditability into what's happening between these two parties. So they would create a private network where there may be the kind of the one deciding who gets to join, what kind of access everyone has. So there's plenty of debate around public versus private in this space, but we believe from our standpoint that there's benefits to these three different architectures just for different use cases. So let's go into more specific use cases of how blockchain could impact hospitality distribution. So movement of availability rates and inventory is one of the most common use cases we see. So the benefits are that suppliers can quickly and easily update information, and that information will almost in real time be dispersed to all connected parties. So this removes the need for the constant syncing of local caches at every step in the chain. It helps the sales outlets have more confidence in the data they're receiving. Oftentimes we see when there are multiple intermediaries chained together, maybe multiple wholesalers, there's some question from sales outlets whether or not the availability that they're seeing is actually up to date. So it may be an example where they have a guest or a potential guest who's searching for a hotel. they display a rate and availability at a hotel that is maybe out of sync. So that guest goes through the booking process, and only when the sales outlet does the final query that makes it all the way back to the CRS or back to the hotel system do they find that actually this wasn't the real rate, or that rate's been updated, or there is no availability. And there's potential for them to lose that guest because this information is out of sync. Another benefit for the ARI use case is that there's consistent data and logic for all participants in the network. So instead of each chain together intermediary or the hotel system and the sales outlet using different sets of logic to maybe interpret rates, to interpret cancellation policies, things like that, because the data schema on the network, and also sometimes if there's a distributed application built on top, the actual business logic that operates on that data is the same for all connected parties. So this actually, and I'll talk a bit more about the pace of innovation that this could be, but this makes it much easier to roll out new pricing strategies, new functionality to the network as a whole quickly, instead of relying on every single intermediary to upgrade their individual system with new logic, with new functionality for the API, stuff like that. So one of the benefits is this hopefully will increase the pace of innovation compared to what's out there today. So this is a very brief example of how the ARI flow could look in a blockchain-based distribution network. So in this example, actually, let me jump back one note. In this example, the PMS is sending an update into the network saying there's actually 7 rooms available for a particular room type. This comes in as a transaction. This transaction makes it into the network. Let me go down. Hold on here. There you go. This transaction makes it into the network, is committed through whatever consensus mechanism is used in this particular network. It's committed as a transaction in a new block. This new block is distributed to all connected nodes. And then each of those nodes appends that block to the blockchain copy they have. And then the view of availability has now been updated for the entire network from 6 to 7. Then if any of the connected parties, meaning in this case OTAs, travel agents, or guests, queries the network for the most recent availability count for that room type, they'll go back a message saying that there are 7 rooms available, and they'll be able to return those results back to a guest or produce a booking at that level. So that's just kind of how the flow works today, or could potentially work in blockchain distribution versus some of the different models where API messages are being sent back and forth to the local caches and stuff like that. So another potential use case is for descriptive content. So this could be things like images, video, let's say text-based descriptions for properties or room types. And one of the difficulties today is that hotels have a lot of trouble keeping all this content in sync across different sales outlets. So we see examples where maybe a hotel needs to log into 5 different extranets to update a piece of content pertaining to one of their room nights. The big problem there is that there's a lot of overhead to keep things updated. The quality of content for some sales outlets can be pretty poor just because hotels often don't take the time to make sure that their content's perfect everywhere. They may be really focused on the larger OTAs because that's where a lot of their distribution comes through. And basically it makes a bad experience for the guests because the content isn't good, the images can be good, they can be out of date, things like that. So what blockchain could provide here is it can create a single shared data store for hotel content, meaning that instead of the hotelier updating their content in multiple places and multiple extranets, there could actually be one location where they can make those updates, and then all connected parties could read that content or pull data from that single data store, and everything would be in sync, and a much better experience for the hotelier and the connected parties. Another thing that's interesting is that because the blockchain network isn't just transmitting data, it's actually storing the current state of data on the blockchain. There's potential here for third parties to come in and offer services to actually enrich that data or manage the content for hoteliers. So this could be an example of this is, let's say that hotelier has content descriptions for room types in their native language, they could pay a third party and give them permission on the network to actually come in and do all the translations. So this third party would be able to read and write pieces of content to the blockchain with the hotel's permission and actually kind of manage or enrich that content. And then all these connected parties would get the enriched content at the same time. So just kind of there's potential for different types of services to be built as a result of this technology if it were to start moving content between connected parties. So there are some limitations here, however. Because of the nature of blockchain, because the data store is immutable, it's append only, meaning every single change gets appended as an appended transaction to the history of transactions. The size of the blockchain can grow very quickly. So this is why, particularly with images or video content, which just by their nature are very large, blockchain isn't a great way to store that content, because every single change throughout the history, potential history of, let's say you've made a few adjustments to an image, every single version of that image would be saved. And what that results in is like a blockchain that can grow in size very quickly, and it can be very difficult to actually hold all this information in the local nodes. Text content's a little bit better, but non-text-based content can be a problem. So there are some possible solutions for this. What we're looking at, and I believe what a number of other parties are looking at, is storing hash references to externally hosted content on chain. So this means you're not actually storing the image or the video on the blockchain, but you're storing a reference to it with a hashed value of the content, but then maybe a URL out to some different party that's hosting the content. The benefit here is that instead of it slims down the amount of data that's stored on chain, while still providing some record of what that piece of content was at that point in time based on its stored hash reference. Another possible solution is blockchain pruning, because in this case, this isn't a blockchain that's operating something like cryptocurrency, which really needs to store a history of every single transaction for audibility's sake. It's possible that after a certain amount of time, blocks could be kind of chopped off the end of the chain or keyframed or checkpointed, giving all the connected parties still the confidence and some level of auditability, but there's no need to go back maybe more than 3 years. So content could be dropped after 2 years, and that helps to keep the size of the blockchain small for all connected nodes. So another use case of kind of bringing this technology into the industry gives hoteliers the ability to receive bookings in ways that are similar to how they operate with their direct channels today. So this could be maybe they have an IBE or a booking engine that they use. Maybe some of their bookings are received, through a telephone call or front desk. We can still kind of combine best of both worlds here, which is like the benefit of full transparency into who's coming, how they came to book, full control over their rate distribution through their booking engine. But also at the same time, they get the benefits of having having their inventory sold, not just on their brand.com or something like that. So this works because smart contracts on the network can actually take some of the responsibility that intermediaries may traditionally hold. So this could be around handling payment. This could be around offering some guarantee to the guest. It just makes it much easier for hoteliers to get visibility and control over kind of how their information is being sent out there to be booked in a way that's very similar to like a direct booking channel today. So another great use case for blockchain, which is kind of how it's taken off as an underlying technology for cryptocurrencies, is that it's a very good for payments, moving tokens of value between two parties. So in the hospitality, there's a lot of a lot of friction around payment and reconciliation. Maybe there's a lot of cross-border payments. Maybe an online travel agency in the United States, needs to receive commission from a hotel in Thailand, let's say. And there could be some friction with accountability, meaning is the OTA actually going to get paid? Do they have a contract in place? Do they have the confidence that they'll get paid for producing a booking for that Thai hotel? Obviously, the fees for moving money across borders are high with existing payment networks, and there isn't much transparency into the transactions that happen in an existing distribution network. So one of the benefits here is that once you have all this information, all these bookings, all these rates, everything kind of in one central data repository, you can use that as a source of truth to start to automate a lot of these payments, meaning that instead of at the end of the month manually reconciling, like, okay, I can see that this OTA sent me these bookings, or I produce bookings for these hotels. I need to send them an invoice. I need to call them. I need to make sure they pay me. The blockchain can be used as a source of truth to trigger smart contracts that actually would trigger these payments on the network. So people can have the confidence that they'll be paid on time. And it also creates kind of a lower threshold for trust between two parties that want to do business together. If a new OTA comes to a hotel and says, hey, I would like to sell your rooms, instead of maybe needing to sign a traditional paper contract that the hotel or that the OTA could use to use like traditional legal means to follow up on if they don't get paid, a smart contract could give them the confidence to maybe build that relationship because they know that smart contract would hold the funds that are required in escrow until some conditions met on the chain. So this is definitely payment and reconciliation is definitely an interesting use case because there are high fees for today's payment networks. There's also a lack of auditability in the way the data is moved between kind of OTAs and hotels today. So this can definitely bring some efficiency and streamline the process, as well as lower cost to payment and reconciliation in the industry. There are some difficulties, however, as I'm sure many people have seen over the last few months. Cryptocurrencies are very volatile, meaning day to day, the exchange rate or the conversion rate between whatever your local fiat currency is. So a fiat currency could be, US dollars, euros, and how much it's worth in crypto can swing up to 10% per day. This isn't necessarily a good fit for hoteliers that maybe pay their staff in their local fiat currency. The reason this is difficult is because a lot of these smart contracts, or especially in the way bookings work in this industry, is a guest will book and create a reservation maybe for a stay that's 12 months into the future, right? So whatever they're paying for at that point in time, if it's converted into a crypto, or if they pay in crypto, that means that 12 months down the road, when the hotel actually receives that payment, the value of the underlying crypto in their local fiat currency could be completely different. If that currency lost 50% of its value, then in that case, the hotel would receive compensation for that stay that's 50% less than what they originally sold it for. So we think this is one of the biggest barriers to using crypto for payment and reconciliation today. Just the nature of the industry and how there's a big delay between the time when bookings are made and potentially when that money is finally transferred to the hotel, or when commission's sent back to the OTA or the sales channel. There are a number of stable coins. So these are cryptocurrencies that are pegged, or usually pegged 1-to-1 to some other fiat currency. There's a number of these. Some work on just there's a bunch of fiat currency in a bank account somewhere, and there's a equivalent number of stable coins stable coins that are out in the world being used. If any time someone would like to exchange one of these stable coins or stablecoin tokens for their underlying fiat currency, there's a guarantee that they'll get paid out in that fiat currency. So this produces a 1-to-1 kind of peg. It's still a cryptocurrency. All the benefits are still there, but it has a lot more stability compared to other floating cryptos. There's also some stablecoins that use market mechanisms to try to keep the value as close to one-to-one peg as possible. There's been varying levels of success, but with most recent market volatility, there's been some really good tests of these strategies, and some are proving to be better than others. But from our standpoint, we're taking a strong look at using stablecoins for payment and reconciliation in the industry because of the benefits it provides. So another possible use case for blockchain is coordination across multiple suppliers. So today, when guests are booking packages, they're often creating bookings for multiple suppliers. So if they're booking, let's say, a travel package that includes a hotel stay, a flight to that destination, and then a rental car when they arrive, they're usually creating one booking with a single payment, but then all those suppliers need to be paid out or compensated. And there is a use here for blockchain to kind of handle that distribution of payments across suppliers with smart contracts kind of powering that, the way that commission or payment is divided between suppliers automatically, bringing a bit more efficiency to that process. Another possible use case is coordination between suppliers. So let's say the guest bought this package, they have a reservation for a hotel, a flight for an airline, a rental car. Today, there isn't much communication between those parties if something happens. Let's say the guest ends up deciding that they're not going to go, or they miss their flight. Oftentimes, that change won't be communicated out, to this case, the hotel or the rental car agency. So there's potential here for a blockchain to be used kind of as a source of information for all parties to read from in the event that something does happen with that guest, one of those or piece of that guest reservation. So those were the potential kind of like use cases for the technology, but the biggest question is, okay, what does that lead to? What can that potentially change in the industry as a whole? And we believe at ARI that a lot of the friction in the industry today is based on or not the friction, but a lot of the reason things have gotten a little crazy on the way distribution works is because it's very difficult for new applicants or new parties to get started in this industry. Before you even have a product to sell or before you even have something to offer a guest, there's a number of steps you need to take to create a product. The first one is just general data access. Like, how do you get access to hotel data to power your product? A second piece here is hotel trust. If you're a new application, how can you give a hotel the confidence that you'll be able to pay them or that they should give you access to their rates? There's a lot of friction there. It's difficult to go out and talk to 400,000 hotels and build relationships with them in the same way someone like Expedia has over the past 20 years. There's a huge barrier to entry around just being a valid business or surviving long enough to become a valid business to convince hotels that you are a trustworthy party and they should do business with you. So once you have those two things in place, or once you even build the trust for the hotel, you still need to build connectivity to some of the service providers that hotels use. So this could be a channel manager. This could be a CRS. They have 25, 30 connections or integrations to do every month. How do you, as a new application, get into their queue without waiting months and months to finally get the connectivity, just so you can start providing this data to your customers? So these are the three biggest friction points we see as a new application or a new product in the space trying to get going. So what we hope blockchain can do as a result is take away a lot of this friction, meaning that, okay, now everyone is using a shared distributed database. The APIs are open. The connectivity basically is like you connect to one central, this distributed database, you get access to all this hotel data. By the nature of the way this works, there's a level of built-in trust involved here. The hotel would be much more confident to say, okay, I'll do business with you. I have some guarantee because of the way this system works that I'll get paid. and the new application will have some level of confidence that they would receive commission or they would receive some compensation from the hotel without relying on a paper contract to make that happen. So we believe that this technology will increase the pace of innovation in the industry because it makes it much easier for smaller companies to test out products without needing to go through these 3 different steps just to get up and running, just to see if what they have to offer is even valuable to anybody. So increase the pace innovation. Hopefully, with easier access, some of these smaller companies will gain traction, will increase competition, especially the large OTAs like Expedia or Booking.com, which ultimately will result in lower distribution costs, which is really what we're focusing on, or that's like the kind of the end goal. The hope here is that instead of hotels maybe paying between 15 and 30% to receive a booking, with increasing competition, that downward pressure of the market will lower distribution costs across the board. I don't know if we'll ever see commission rates as low as what airlines have managed to get, but we hope that in general costs will come down for hotels for distribution. Ultimately, maybe even reducing the cost that guests pay to book hotel rooms. So that's the hope here, and that's what we believe at Arise. And I know Winding Tree also has a very similar vision. They just go about it in a slightly different way. That's what we believe the end result will be as this gains traction. Let's see, is that it? So the initiatives in this space so far, we've kind of broken this into 3 very rough categories here. And I think the previous webinar that touched on a lot of the use cases in the industry has another breakdown, a bit more in detail about some of the blockchain distribution initiatives. But we kind of see 3 categories. So the first one are the kind of like the B2C OTAs. There's a number of either they've started ICOs or they're building platforms that accept cryptocurrency to book, to allow guests to book hotel rooms through their platforms. And many of them offer 0% commissions to hotels to put their rooms on their platform. So that's kind of one group, really focusing on the B2C side. There's this kind of central group, which is what we believe ourselves and Winding Tree fall into, which is kind of like the B2B infrastructure protocol level. So Winding Tree's approach is very much focused on kind of an open source model, very much on like the public networks, permissionless networks, and they've set themselves up as a foundation to kind of develop these protocols and develop this concept for the industry as a whole, which makes a lot of sense. They argue that if this is being developed by a company or a for-profit organization, the incentives are misaligned. You need to be a foundation, completely open source, to develop a protocol that actually can be used by everyone without one party centralizing control. And we believe their vision is correct. It totally makes sense. So they're coming at that kind of like public permission angle. At Arise, we're starting from a different angle. We're building the underlying technology to start to allow 2 parties to kind of connect and transact directly. So one of these cases we're looking at is something like, let's say, a large hotel group wants to do business with a TMC. Today, they rely on an intermediary to move that data. Why not provide them with the technology to kind of transact with each other directly? So we're taking kind of the private permissioned approach and moving towards kind of the consortium model in the middle. Well, Winding Tree is coming at it from the more public permissionless open source angle. And we think both offer benefit for the industry as a whole here. Then there's a number of internal initiatives that we've seen. TUI Group especially, they're using blockchain to kind of coordinate within the organization, between the different groups inside their organization, to manage available inventory and how information is passed within those groups. They may move some of the technology public, kind of introduce it for wider use, but they're using it quite successfully internally at this point in time. So this is a very, very high level overview of what's going on in the space. There's many other, companies and organizations that are taking a look at blockchain for distribution and hospitality. And we expect many more to come up as well in the near future here. So I think that's pretty much all I've got as far as this goes. Let's see. So now we can open it up for questions.
Yeah, great. Alex, thank you. That was a great explanation how blockchain solves some of the issues as well as provides some of the unique benefits for distribution and travel and hospitality. We really, really appreciate your approach to this topic. We do have a few minutes for questions, and for those of you who are in chat, please direct those questions to me in the chat window, and I'll ask our presenters. We've already received a few, Alex, so are you ready for the first one?
Yep, sure.
All right. Well, we've heard a lot about the potential for blockchain-based distribution systems to cause disruption in the hospitality sector. Alex, how much do you think this will actually disrupt companies like Expedia and other huge OTAs, considering they also spend vast amounts of money on other services other than purely distribution technology, namely advertising?
Yep. So this is an interesting topic. As I'm sure everyone's aware, the amount, like the marketing spend by especially the larger OTAs is massive, and as a result, we don't expect them in the near term or even midterm to go away. We don't necessarily expect blockchain as a technology to disrupt their market position. What we'd expect is, even let's say blockchain technology or blockchain network starts to gain traction as a means to move data between hoteliers and the sales channels. We would expect someone like Expedia or Booking.com to connect to that blockchain, to pull supply from that blockchain. Maybe there's potential here for over time because we believe the pace of innovation will increase. The barriers to entry will be lowered in this industry for maybe new, smaller niche OTAs or new products that people haven't even thought of yet to gain traction. There may be potential for these, some smaller OTAs to gain enough traction to actually one day compete with the likes of Expedia or Booking.com. But in the short term and midterm, it's hard to compete with marketing budgets when they are driving all the guests to their own brands. There's another angle here around the difficulty of hotels difficulty for hotels to control their onward distribution, and some of these OTAs undercutting their rates publicly when compared to their brand.coms that we think blockchain may improve. But for the major OTAs, their position's kind of sit in there. So we don't see blockchain as being a major disruptor in the shorter or midterm for them. Yep.
Great. Well, thank you. And this next question actually has a follow-up immediately after, so I'll let you tackle the first part. Okay. How do suppliers like hotels and other participants in the distribution channel decide which blockchain to use? And is it even important of a decision at this stage?
So the way we see it is that there probably will be a number of these blockchain distribution networks emerging over the next 12 months or so. In the beginning, we see hotels using them as they use any other channel. So if you're a hotelier who uses a channel manager to manage the OTAs you connect to, we would expect you to use the same channel manager to connect to a particular network and manage distribution through that network. There's no reason. If you're not exclusively distributing your inventory in one OTA today through a guaranteed allocation or anything like that, there's no reason you couldn't use all of these networks at the same time. We would hope that the fragmentation that exists in the industry today doesn't just repeat itself again, but with multiple blockchain networks instead of multiple centralized intermediaries. So at this point, I don't think there's a risk. There's no clear winner. There's no clear party that's way out in front as far as blockchain networks go. But there's no reason why a hotelier couldn't use multiple networks to handle their distribution. So As far as compatibility between different networks, it's possible that could emerge, but it only takes one person or one group to build a connection between those two networks and move data between the networks seamlessly, and then everyone connected to those networks would have access to the data on both. So it's hard to say. I don't think there's any risk for Hotelier to go with multiple blockchain networks in the beginning, and then as things evolve, kind of if one comes out in front, kind of reevaluate their position at that point in time.
Great. I'm actually glad you mentioned fragmentation. The follow-up to that question is there a risk that a big hotel like Marriott could one day prefer one blockchain platform over others, meaning other systems could either become disadvantaged or become incompatible?
Absolutely. That's definitely a possibility. The question in this particular example is how much control does Marriott want to retain over this network? If Marriott's decided that they're going to create their own blockchain network with full control, meaning they're the party that decides who gets to connect and who doesn't get to connect, then there is definitely a chance that there could be incompatibility between blockchains just because Marriott hasn't opened it up for other people to use. That's absolutely a possibility. We would hope that wouldn't happen. Again, there's always potential to kind of connect these networks together so data can move between them. But in this particular example, if Marriott does prefer one blockchain and they want to retain control of that blockchain, then there's definitely potential for fragmentation here. We believe it kind of goes against the nature of what blockchain is all about. The sharing of control is like one of the main value propositions for this. And there can be some questions around, okay, if Marriott fully controls this, do they really need to use a blockchain, I guess is the question. But it's a much broader discussion. So we would hope that the benefits of having a kind of decentralized control, either through a consortium model, through a fully public model, outweigh the kind of the desire for Marriott to control the system in this example or any other large hotel chain. So there's definitely risk of fragmentation here going forward, but we would hope that the nature of how these networks work encourages people to be more open and really focus on compatibility between these systems for whatever model emerges in the future. Yep.
All right, great. Thanks, Alex. Are there any more questions from the audience for Doug, Andrew, or Alex? I'm just waiting for any straggler questions. No? All right, well, again, I want to thank Alex for his well-constructed and informative presentation on loyalty use cases for blockchain. We look forward to seeing you guys all this Thursday, same time, for the next episode of this series for blockchain webinars. Don't forget to register for the webinars at htng.org/webinars. It's plural, so webinars. On that page, you'll also find all the past webinars also listed. You are welcome to review this recording and other episodes for this webinar series at your leisure. You'll probably know a few people who weren't able to make this call today live at the presentation. You're encouraged to direct your colleagues and access those videos there. If you have any other questions or feedback, you can direct those to the email address of workgroups, also plural, at htng.org. Again, workgroups at htng.org for any feedback or anything like that. If you have any other questions, please go ahead and direct them as well. Thank you again, and thank you again to our presenters.